Good evening. I'm Megan Castillo. I'm Town Hall's program manager. On behalf of Town Hall Seattle and the Korean American Historic Society, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's live stream presentation with literary translators Bruce and Ju-Chan Fulton. As we get underway, I'd like to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continued use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. Thank you all for tuning in. Town Hall is proud to be a community-focused organization and a place where we can share and sustain ideas and creativity, even if it means we can't gather in person. I'd like to thank Bruce and Ju-Chan for appearing tonight to help make that possible. Town Hall will be continuing to produce virtual content this fall, and many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form on our digital media library. Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include Senator Sherrod Brown with Executive Dow Constantine about the legacy of progressive senators who preceded him, Alex Ross with Ann Powers talking about art and politics, Stuart Getty with Max Delson with a primer on gender expression, and many more. Town Hall and the nonprofit community at large have been put under significant strain due to the event cancellations and ever-changing landscape. We hope you'll consider extending your generosity to help support us during this difficult time by making a donation by clicking the donate button at the bottom of your screen or becoming a member. You can make a donation online or text Town Hall to 44321 to give. Our partner booksellers have also been hit by the negative effects of the COVID outbreak and can use your support as well. If you're interested in supporting local independent bookstores by purchasing a copy of the book being presented tonight, please use the link on this live stream page to purchase through Elliott Bay Books. For viewers who want to watch this broadcast with closed captioning, we recommend viewing the stream via our YouTube page. To enable real-time closed captioning, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of the video player. The video will be available for rewatching immediately following tonight's broadcast. Tonight's presentation will be about 45 minutes, followed by Q&A. Bruce and Ju-Chan will select questions from those submitted in the Ask a Question field at the bottom center of your screen. You can also vote on which questions will be addressed by clicking the arrow next to the question to upvote it. We cannot guarantee that we'll be able to address every question, but we will try to get to as many as possible. Please keep your questions concise and in the form of a question. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our Arts and Culture series is supported by For Culture, Arts Fund, Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, and Wincoat Foundation Northwest. Finally, Town Hall is a member-supported organization, so I'd like to thank all of our members watching tonight. And now I'd like to introduce Erica from the Korean American Historical Society. Welcome, Erica.
Hello, thank you, Megan. Hi, my name is Erica Chung. And I'm with the Korean American Historical Society, whose mission is to enrich the collective memory of Korean Americans through collecting, maintaining, and transmitting the heritage and achievements of Koreans living in the Pacific Northwest and abroad. During COVID-19, Korean American Historical Society, with funding from For Culture, has redeveloped sites so we can transition more physical artifacts to digital items. So hopefully in the near future, more of the items will be accessible to the public. Also, I have been representing the Korean American Historical Society and participating in the Wing Loop project to collect Asian Pacific American COVID-19 stories, including Korean American COVID stories. The Wing Loop exhibit is scheduled for April 2021. Korean American Historical Society is excited to be co-presenting tonight's live stream with Town Hall.
Hi, Erica, can you hear me? Real quick, we're getting some really bad feedback from you, so if you could make sure your volume is down to about 50%, and then also make sure you don't have another tab open with this live stream in it.
Pretty low on the volume.
Okay, you might have another tab open.
How's that?
Still getting that same ringing. Do you have another window open with the live stream in it?
No, not here, but downstairs. I could check and see if I could. I'll ask my husband to turn off his volume, see if that helps.
If he's not in the same room, it's probably not that.
Yes.
It's probably on your device. Do you have another window open, maybe with the tab in it?
No, but it sort of occurred to me I didn't open it with Chrome. I opened it with Firefox. So would you like me to switch over?
That's probably not the feedback issue either.
I'll lower the volume a little bit and get a
Okay.
little closer. How's that?
Okay, we can try it. I'll interrupt
Okay.
again if it's too bad.
Okay.
Thanks.
Let me know. Korean American Historical Society is excited to be co-presenting tonight's live stream with Town Hall Seattle, featuring Bruce and Ju-Chan Fulton, translators of One Left, a novel. The subject of tonight's novel is very important in Korean history and also in other Asian history that should be remembered and acknowledged, so we can learn from our past and stop those atrocities from happening to other women around the world. Bruce and Ju-Chan are translators of numerous volumes of modern Korean fictions. They met at Seoul National University in 1978, where Bruce was a Peace Corps volunteer, and they were married in 1979. They both received their master's degree from the University of Washington, then returned to Korea for further education. Eventually, Bruce and Ju-Chan realized that they were an ideal translation team. Bruce, a native speaker of English who comprehends Korean, and Ju-Chan, a native speaker of Korean who is fluent in English. Among their awards and fellowships are 2 U.S. National Endowment for the Arts Translation Fellowships and the first residency at the Banff International Literary Translation Center, awarded to translators from any Asian language. Bruce Fulton is the inaugural holder of the Young Bin Min Chair in Korean Literature and Literary Translation at the Department of Asian Studies. Their most recent translations are tonight's novel, as well as novels Lina by Kim Sagwa and The Catcher in the Loft by Chun Eun-young. Their translations of Korean short fictions appeared in journals such as the Massachusetts Review, Rentha, and the Asinto. The Fulton's translation of Kim Soom's book, One Left, is the subject of tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Bruce and Ju-Chan Fulton.
Thank you. Thank you, Erica. On behalf of Ju-Chan, we'd like to welcome all of you to our very first live streaming event. So we would beg your indulgence as we work through this new world of live stream presentations. We'd like to start off by thanking the staff at Town Hall, Bruno, Candace, and Megan. We'd like to thank the Elliott Bay Book Company for sponsoring these programs. We have a long history with Elliott Bay Book Company and are very happy to be involved with them. We'd also like to thank the Korean American Historical Society for their support over the years. And last but not least, we owe a big thank you to the University of Washington Press, the 32nd publisher we approached with a proposal for One Left. I'd also like to give a special welcome to my students from the University of British Columbia. We are reading One Left in my modern Korean novel course. So between Ju-Chan and I, we're going to be giving you two presentations in one. I will be speaking about the novel and why we chose to translate it. And Ju-Chan will be talking about the very long and arduous process involved in finding the University of Washington Press, a saga that could take up a book-length work of its own. And after Ju-Chan and I speak, we will give a very short bilingual reading from the book, and then we'll be happy to entertain any questions. So let me start by going back in time to what we refer to as the colonial period, and late in the colonial period, in the 1930s, Japan entered into war with China. And this war ended up exacting a terrible toll on the colonies that constituted the Japanese Empire. In the case of Korea, two of the most onerous policies were the grain requisition policy and what is called the Jingyong, which was the conscription of young Korean men into the Japanese military, into wartime factories, and into the mines. But a lesser known ancillary of this conscription program was the induction of some 200,000 Korean girls, and that's what they were. In many cases, they were not yet physically mature when they were forcibly taken from their home villages or were persuaded to go to what they were told would be a good job in a factory that would allow them to send money home to their families. So, as we read in great detail in One Left, there began a life in which they were situated in so-called comfort stations and were forced to take as many as 50 soldiers a day. So why did we undertake translating this volume? For one thing, it's the very first Korean novel to focus exclusively on these women. And we felt compelled as two translators who have been involved in the translation of works of trauma to make this novel, and most importantly, the stories of these 200,000 plus girls to the historical record. As for trauma, this year seems to be an especially important time for considering our translation work in light of social justice and truth and reconciliation. So to give voice to these women, of whom only 17, we believe, currently survive, is something we consider a necessary dimension of addressing the historical outrages that modern Korea, no less than any other nation, and perhaps more so, have experienced. Now, we want to be clear that neither one left. Hanmyang is the title of author Kim Soom's original Korean version. So neither Hanmyang nor One Left, our translation, should be understood in any way as an example of Japan bashing. It is all too easy when considering historical problems to attempt to lay blame. But rather, what Kim Soom, the Korean author, is attempting to do in this novel is to let these women speak, to let their voices to be heard. And in this way, she is functioning somewhat like a practitioner of Korean native spirituality, whose primary function is to link people on this earth with the spirits of those who have died an untimely or early death, and allow those spirits to speak and to express themselves so that they can finally move to their final resting place with a sense of healing and a relatively peaceful mind. So when you read this novel, you will find that it is not just the so-called comfort women, that is, the women involved in sexual servitude, but we see also that some of the young Japanese soldiers were themselves recruited into the military with little or no idea of what they were getting themselves involved in. So, and for us as translators, it is not simply a compelling theme that involves us, but it's also important that that theme be expressed in an engaging literary style. And here again, we think that Kim Soom has done a brilliant job of connecting the history of the comfort women with in a present day context in downtown Seoul, in a neighborhood that is going redevelopment, in which most of the residents have left. The protagonist of the novel, who is a 91 or 92-year-old veteran of the comfort stations, but who has not gone public, who has not pre-registered, is following the lives of the surviving comfort women until there is only one left. And so she finds herself living in the present moment, the kind of shadow existence that she has lived for the last 70 years since she managed to return from the comfort station in Manchuria to the Korean Peninsula, there to have never confided in anyone, even her own family, about the years that she spent in the Manchurian comfort station. So if any of you have read two Korean American novels, one by Nora Oakjaw Keller, titled Comfort Woman, and the other by Chun-Rae Lee, titled Adjust Your Life, you'll see that both novels take place in the present, but involve a significant amount of contact involved with a former comfort woman. In our view, the juncture of these two narrative streams doesn't really work that well because the flashbacks tend to overpower the present narrative. But what Kim Soom has done is to lend the flashbacks that take up a good portion of one left with references to the testimony of the surviving comfort woman. That is, much of the detail of the flashbacks to the narrator and her experiences in the comfort station in the late 1930s and 1940s are based not solely on her fictional imagination, but on the actual testimony of dozens of comfort women, not only Korean, but Chinese, and at least one Indonesian woman. So in the present, the narrator, the protagonist, this is a limited third-person narrative, has constant contact with the women with whom she lived all those several years. And at the end of the novel, when she makes the fateful decision to visit the last surviving registered Korean comfort woman in a university hospital, she undergoes an epiphany in which, for the first time, she remembers and echoes her given name, the name that was given to her at birth, Pungil, and a name that she has not used for 70 years. So in doing this, she is reclaiming her identity. She is reclaiming who she was before she was taken one day from the marsh where she was gathering snails and loaded into a truck and taken with other girls to a train station in the city of Daegu, and from there a multi-day rail journey to Manchuria. So she is reclaiming her identity. She is giving context to the voice that we hear in this novel. And ironically, she is imagining herself a 13-year-old girl, or perhaps 12 in the Western count, once again in her ancestral home. So, with that, I think I've talked enough for a time. I'm going to turn the microphone over to my good wife and co-translator, Ju-Chan, who will regale you with the fantastic journey of how our translation found a publisher.
No, I don't think I need. Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me?
We will assume that you can unless told otherwise.
We hear you.
Great. Thank you.
You can you hear me?
Yes, they can hear us.
Okay. So my voice is okay. I was so worried that Bruce is having stroke because he's so slow and he is a slow person to begin with. But he promised that he will not use and. So therefore, I think he's making very, very strong effort. And so his speech became slower, right? You don't have any problem, okay. This book is actually nightmare. It's not just content. It's not, all the history that what happened. It's also nightmare, but for translators, it's a nightmare. It was so hard to get to publish, and I still cannot believe it's actually published. And I hope that nobody had to go through the experience we had. It's very meaningful and fruitful and painful for the story itself and the history itself. But for us, our experience is very, very painful. This book could have came out a year ago, but it did not work that way. And we also gave up publishing this book because it was so painful that the painfulness came from, in the end, it just we don't communicate and we don't trust each other. We means us as a translator, and the part that we are dealing with is Korea side publisher and agent who joined the bandwagon. Like 6 months later, suddenly became an agent popped up, and also author. And we had no problem of getting the okay from the publisher and author to start translation. They were excited. They were so thrilled. They were so grateful. So they each sent us box of books for thank you. And then pretty soon we learned that, oh no, there is another translator. The author happened to give permission. And so only way, we already start translation. Only way we keep going is that we promise them we don't want exclusive right, but if the other party happen to be British person, you can guess who British person will be. If that person find the publisher before us, we will gladly walk away. So that was a deal, and that was always behind the scene. When the publisher come up. From the beginning, we approached the biggest publisher in US, local publisher, and also we approached the academic publisher that would work together. But then one of the reviewer said that the book is voyeuristic. We were floored. How could this book be voyeurist? It's based on an oral history. But these days, we all learn that there are so many opinionated people. So it's nothing new, but it was really, really shocking by a reviewer saying such a thing. It was really surprising. And then there was a third publisher from the beginning. They want this book. And we signed the contract. And then 3 months later, Korea said, no, we don't want that publisher. And then we just had to give up for 2-3 months because we couldn't sleep. We were arguing all the time. We were thinking that maybe it's time that we should stop translating. And our younger son said, why bother? You're working all the time, but nobody give you S work, okay? And so don't work anymore, forget it. And we are wondering, maybe we shouldn't translate living authors. Maybe we should look for that author's work only. Or maybe it's our name. Maybe something is not right here. But in the end, we regain our energy. We sent a proposal, and the 32nd publisher is University of Washington, right? 5-10 minutes walk away from our house. So we are very glad this book finally came out, even though 1 year later. But we were all on the same page that this book, I mean, we means Korea side and us. What we want is that book comes out before this comfort woman grandmas all passed away. That's our ultimate goal. And so we have all the same goal. However, how to reach to that goal, we had so many hindrances had to go through, and that shouldn't be the way. Eventually, after writing emails after about a book length worth of emails with agent, publisher, author, and also US publisher, all that, we decided we have to personally meet the author and work with her. So that's the way it really worked. It's a golden rule that when you have trouble, all these emails really doesn't get there faster than actually see and meet and looking at you, because we were treated like a bottom of the barrel and money hungry translator, and and very rude couple of old rogue. That was the way we were treated all along. But then when we sit down, have a cup of coffee, and had a 2-hour-long talk, and they all happy, they found that we are not that bad people. And so, in the end, we got work done. Thank you.
So all's well that ends well, even though it ends much later than we ever thought it would end. So we're going to transition now to a short reading from about halfway through the book. And the occasion of this reading is the death of one of the girls. So you're going to hear a lot of given names, two-syllable given names, and several of them will be followed by the Korean word 언니, which literally means older sister, but among friends would be used to someone who is older than you, or simply as a term of respect to someone who might be the same age.
Maybe I should be the first.
Oh, yes. So Ju-Chan will read from the Korean, and then I will read a somewhat longer version from our translation.
We may not read the same section, but Bruce, have drink and so speed up a little bit, okay? Because everybody will be sleepy. Okay. 동숙 언니가 죽었어. 애순이 울면서 동숙 언니 방에서 나왔다. 금복 언니는 동숙 언니가 가지고 있던 옷들 중 가장 성한 옷을 찾아 동숙 언니에게 입혔다. 동숙 언니의 가지런하고 기다란 속눈썹들이 시계 초점처럼 떨리고 있어서 그녀는 동숙 언니가 살아있는 게 아닌가 싶었다. 꽃이 없어서 소녀들은 저마다 입김으로 크고 작은 꽃을 피워 동숙 언니를 장식했다. 수옥 언니 잎이 벌어질 때마다 뻐드렁니가 툭 뛰어나오면서 고추꽃 같은 꽃이 서너 송이 피어났다. 연순과 해금이 입김이 어우러져 목단알을 피웠다. 금복 언니는 동숙 언니의 얼굴 바로 위에서 불도화처럼 커다란 꽃을 힘겹게 피우고 있었다. 오도상은 죽은 동숙 언니를 불에 태웠다. 위안소에서 소녀가 죽으면 오도상은 소녀의 시체를 가만히 둘둘싸 벌판에 내다 버리거나 불에 태웠다. 소녀들은 군인들을 받으면서 동숙 언니의 시신이 타는 소리를 듣고 냄새를 맡았다. 배가 부풀러 터지는 소리, 뼈가 타는 소리가 하늘과 땅 사이를 떠돌다가 소녀들이 귀에까지 들려왔다. Because of that time, I think I will cut here. I think you can read more. Okay.
One day, Tongsu-gani coughed up blood, the deep red color of wild strawberries. Her face turned ashen, and the next the girls knew she was having trouble walking. The girls whispered among themselves that she'd come down with lung disease. Tongsu-gani's cough got worse, but still, Ha-ha, the madam at the comfort station, made her take soldiers. After she coughed blood while taking a soldier, Ha-ha turned the nameplate on her door inside out. And to make sure the other girls wouldn't catch her ailment, Ha-ha prevented them from visiting her. From time to time, the girls could hear Tongsu-gani coughing her lungs out, and all day long, her room bore a somber chill along with a bloody stink. The girls would peep into Tongsu-gani's room whenever Ha-ha wasn't looking. The frosts arrived, and Tongsu-gani's condition deteriorated rapidly. Kumbo-gani stopped to see Ha-ha on her way to the wash area. Can't you send her home? I'm not sending her anywhere until she pays off her debt. Even while Tongsu-gani was coughing the last of her lifeblood, her debt continued to swell like a cocoon being spun by a silkworm. Can't I pay it off for her? Do you have any idea how much you owe us? You pay off your debt first, and then I'll listen to you. And with that, Ha-Ha turned and disappeared. Even an imminent death wouldn't make her more generous. An officer on horseback arrived in the middle of the night to find her, that is, the protagonist of our novel, in bed weeping. But after he'd fallen asleep, she left to go to the toilet, and along the way, shivering with cold, she looked into Tongsukani's room. Kumbokani was at Tongsukani's bedside watching over her. Eerie moonlight filtered through the ice-glazed window. The station was tranquil, as if everyone was gone and only the three of them were left. Not even the sound of breathing could be heard from Chunhee Ani's room across the way, where earlier around midnight a bestial whale had escaped, as if she were being taken to a slaughterhouse. Is she sleeping? She just now dropped off. Sure is pretty. She could see Tongsukani's breath blossoming like a white paper flower. She looked uncomprehendingly at Kumbokani. Her face, I mean. Over Kumbokani's shoulder, she could see Tongsukani's face. It was devoid of expression. Kumbokani reached out and caressed the expressionless face. The bloody stench from the room was painfully nauseating and forced her to stifle her breathing. Tongsukani, who had just now dropped off to sleep, never woke up. Kumbokani dressed Tongsukani in the best preserved of her garments. Tongsukani's long eyelashes seemed to twitch faintly, like the second end of a clock. Maybe she's still alive, she herself wondered. No flowers were available, and so the girls opened their mouths and adorned Tongsukani with a bouquet of vapor blossoms. Suokani opened her mouth, and from between her buck teeth came tiny white flowers resembling those of chili pepper plants. Yunsun and Hegum mingled their breath to produce a peony. Perched above Tongsukani's face, Kumbokani was painstakingly fashioning a huge flower that resembled a snowball viburnum. Okay, so that concludes our reading, and now we'd like to transition to the question and answer part of the event.
Great. Thank you both so much. We do have a lot of good questions coming in. I wonder if before we start, if you could just make sure that your volume's down a little bit. It has not been bad. I want you to feel confident that we heard what you were saying completely. There's just a little bit of an echo, so you can just make sure your volume is down a little bit. So I'm going to begin here with some of these questions coming in. So the first one is from Erica, and she's asking, how is the book in translation being received by the Japanese government and the Japanese community?
How is the translation being received by?
The Japanese government and community.
I'm sorry, how is it being received by which community?
How is it being received by the Japanese government and community?
Oh, okay. So Japanese community and university, you're saying? Okay. My best friends are Japanese, and I love Japanese food. And my Japanese friends love me and love Korean food. However, when I have a questions, um, I ask I ask them. They first their reaction is, oh, okay. So you can imagine it's the subject that they want to avoid. And university, I'm not sure, but our um, our saga or our story was on Kyoto News Media, the newspaper based in New York, English, newspaper. And Justin Mackey, the reporter, he followed us for 2 years because he found out that we got Penn Haim translation grant, and he's the one first contact us and asking about the book. So we had a 2 hour interview with him. And then, the University Hawaii Press fall apart, and then more publishers, and then also even University Washington Press, first Korea side, they said no, they don't want to do it. So almost two publishers, they don't want to do it. So um, anyway, Justin was very interested. That's why the article came out. After that, Japan Times and Japan Today in English newspaper came out. And Japan Today, there's a lot of bad comments on the bottom, which Bruce said, avoid it, do not read it. So that's the story. And this one, we never thought about bashing anybody, but this is very important to translate it. And then the author was such a brave author to study all that, research it, and get all the voices come out. So we told ourselves she's the most brave author in this subject, and we must translate. That was it. So now I know why you spoke so slow, because response is very different, very slow. Okay, echoing.
Okay. So the next question, I'm sorry if I say this name wrong. I think it's Hanbuel. The question is, as translators yourselves, how do you find, or what is your opinion about the word or phrase comfort women? As a native Korean, I think this word is sadly misleading, almost a euphemism of some sort. So what is your opinion of that phrase, comfort women?
It's obviously a euphemism, which is why when anything we write, we put the term comfort women in quotation marks. I suppose it's understandable from the point of view of those who are perpetrating an institution of sexual servitude to lessen the possible negative response to was basically part of a history of worldwide history of human trafficking, and so we prefer the sexual servitude, which is what these girls were inducted into. And the Korean term Weonbu likewise is a euphemism. Um, I think for the first time in recent Korean language writing, I saw the term Sangnoye, which basically would be a literal translation of the English sex slaves. So yes, there's no doubt that it's a euphemism, and I think that one left will make it very clear that um, uh, that if there was any comfort derived by the Japanese soldiers, it was probably just a very temporary respite from a situation in which they knew they might die the next day.
Can this
Okay.
put the question in the air because I can read. No?
Candace, could we put the questions on the screen?
Yeah, if you click on the ask a question field, it'll pop up for you as well.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to head into the next one. So the next one's from Peter. Ju-Chan, you mentioned the desire to get the book published before a deadline. When or what is the deadline? And is there any way the general public can help?
Which one? This one?
So we're looking at the one from Peter.
Okay, the question we see by Peter is the English translation is surprisingly high quality. How long did it take you to translate the book? And how difficult was it? Are you open to translating other Korean language books? Well, do you want to answer this or should I?
Peter? Okay. I think it took about 6 months. The difficulty is that you need to space your emotion because it's a lot of intense emotion involves, and so they maintain your calmness and spacing that. And so we did a little bit of time, but it took about 6 months. The difficulty was not the translation much, but the Korean language. You know, it's missing. Lots of times it's not complete sentence. It's a broken sentence, especially when emotion is too powerful, they left out. So you need to read that hidden meaning and finish off the sentence, those things. And also Korean language, the difficulty is the subject, you can drop it out. So here we didn't have much problem, but we did have to think that what the missing part is. And there was over 300 endnotes. And I had to make sure that's correct. And, that took a long time. And you mentioned that, are you open to translate other Korean language books? When you say language books means that we are constantly translating. We work actually several projects same time, but finding American publisher is very, very strange this time. 32 publishers when we have a Me Too movement, and we had what else? We have lots of sexual violence, all that came. And we also had, timing was very good. And we also got Penheim grant, translation grant. However, no matter how minority Korean literature is, we had to go through 32 publishers. I really cannot understand why.
So you had more trouble with this particular book being published than your others, would you say?
Yes, we had double trouble.
Mm. Okay, let's go to the next one. So this one's also from, again, I'm sorry about the name, Hanyul. Do you plan to go over this book in any of your UBC courses? As a student, I would be very interested to learn more about the history and truth about the comfort women.
So, Unbill, I'm teaching this book in Asia 457, but next term in Asia 357, my introductory course in modern Korean literature, we will be reading perhaps not this entire book, but other works that deal with social justice, trauma, certainly, and truth and reconciliation.
Okay, Erica, yeah.
All right, so this next one's from Erica. Did any girls escape from their confinement?
Okay, here. Oh, Erica. Okay, some girls escape, but they are in the book. They are captured, and they were abused, and eventually they die. Well, by the time they want to escape, they're already very sick. But it's a vast plain. It's no tree. Sometimes where could they hide? So eventually, they get caught. And I mentioned that deadline of the book publication is because when we start working, it's 2017 July 2017, and there was about 40, I think close to 40 surviving registered 할머니. Harmony is grandma, the comfort woman grandmas. But their ages, it's 90s. And so we put ourselves a deadline that to publish this book before everybody die. So it's a self, I guess, imposed deadline.
Okay, so this next one is also from Erica. Were any girls able to document their existence during their imprisonment, similar to German concentration camp survivors documenting their imprisonment?
Good question. We are not aware of any such documentation, but the person to address this question to would be Professor Bonnie O of George Washington University, who wrote the foreword to our translation. And this seems an appropriate opportunity to acknowledge the pioneering work that she and Chung-Hee Sarah So, a professor at San Francisco University, did. Professor So wrote a book simply called Comfort Women, which was the first book-length study of the women, and Bonnie O co-edited a collection of essays with Margaret Stetz called The Comfort Woman of World War II. And it's particularly important to recognize these scholars because they themselves were not treated well by others in the field simply because they chose to focus on this long-standing historical problem. In fact, Bonnie O remarked to us that she was shunned by
Korean friends.
many of those in the Korean community. It became known as focusing on the so-called.
Okay. This is not a question, but Martin Lyman is on, and he is just saying hi. So welcome, Martin. The next question I'm going to go to is also from Erica. How long did the Japanese military keep sex slaves? How many years did this go on?
Again, I'm not exactly sure, but in Korean studies, when we research, examine, and discuss the colonial period, that is the period between 1910, when the Kingdom of Chosun was formally annexed or signed an annexation treaty with Japan, until 1945, when the Pacific War ended with Imperial Japan's surrender. Korea was a colony of Imperial Japan. In fact, to our knowledge, the first non-Western sovereign state to be colonized by a non-Western power. And so we date the increasing burdens on Korea and Japan's other colonies to the year 1937, when Japan went to war with China. So we can say with some certainty that that women, and we should emphasize it was not just Korean women, there were Japanese women. In fact, gosh, almost 40 years ago, I believe, when we were in graduate school at the University of Washington, we remember seeing at the Neptune Theater a film called Sandakan 8, which was a film by a Japanese filmmaker about a Japanese so-called comfort station. So from 1937 to 1945 for sure. Before that, don't know.
All right. So Eric is also asking, why don't we use the term sex slaves more openly, since that's what they were?
I'm guessing the primary reason is that, and again, this is what we read in the newspapers. So to an extent, it might be hearsay, but there seems to be a sizable portion of commentators from Japan who insist that this was not, strictly speaking, cases of sexual servitude, but a
Job.
kind of militarized prostitution. We are told in the book that the girls at the comfort station were given what we might understand as script. They were given pieces of paper that apparently were purchased by the soldiers, but this script was turned over to Haha, the madam, and the detail that we see in Kim Soom's novel does not mention any money that the girls received directly. They might receive a present from one of the soldiers, especially an officer who presumably had the means to leave a present. But there we see no evidence that that money changed hands, certainly between soldiers and the girls, and so it's difficult to justify that this could in any way be a consensual or a prostitution exchange.
Right, and they were captured. Right, the women were captured and taken against their will, as well. Is that correct?
Well, in One Left, the protagonist is forcibly taken and put into the back of a truck. But the testimony of the other women, which we see in the other girls the protagonist gets to know, is that several of them were misled to believe that they were going to a good place, a job in a factory in Japan, which is where a lot of the boys and the young men went, um, and so they were they were misled into leaving, and of course never. Uh, there was even among the girls at the station. There was one who was from Pyongyang, the present-day capital of North Korea, who had been trained as a gisang. A gisang is a professional entertaining woman, not a prostitute, as um, a kind of a derogatory interpretation that came into being again during the colonial period. But women who were trained in the entertaining arts, um, and who did have the liberty into a romantic liaison with a client, but this individual too did not. Um, we see in the novel she expressed no sentiments that this was something that she had been trained to do, or that this was in any way related to her training as a gisang.
So Peter has a question here. The estimated number of comfort women varies from a low 100,000 to a high 410,000 due to destroyed records. You quote 200,000. Do you think that's an accurate number? And maybe how did you come to that number?
Which one?
200,000.
Oh,
Is that accurate?
okay. So recently, well, if you have read the One Left and then the introduction, um, Dr. O mentioned that a Chinese scholar argued that it's over 400,000, including Chinese girls. So I think it's hard to say that accurate number, but it's we believe that we about 200,000 for Koreans, and other scholars can find more about it.
Bonnie O mentions in her foreword to our translation that between 1995 and I think 2016, 45 PhD dissertations were written on the topic. So I am guessing that the research undertaken, this single amount of research, must have come to a consensus of the figure. It was always difficult when we're discussing sensitive historical matters to come to a definitive count. For example, in the May 1980 uprising in the southern city of Gwangju, is thought to have resulted in well over 1,000 deaths, but I believe the current official count remains at 192. So the numbers are necessarily inexact, but what we should remember is that whatever the number was, we're talking not about an anonymous body of young women, we're talking about 200,000 individuals. And the triumph of One Left is that Kim Soom, in researching the testimony of these women and giving names to them, portraying them as individuals, I think is brilliant and long overdue.
And for me, I finished my college in Korea, but until I was working on this book, I was really hit by what comfort woman is, because I remember, I think we just zip by uh, the words comfort woman and in school, and we don't go in depth. So I went through that, and here I was reading and finding more about it. But when one of the publisher that we worked with, you know, extensively before, mentioning that it's a sensational, we don't need another sensational, and everybody already knows. And I had to argue that really it's news to me. I only knew that little bit, top of the iceberg.
Mhm.
And I think, in a way, Koreans, they have a kind of comfort woman fatigue in a way. They want to kind of avoid. They hear a lot. There is every Wednesday they have this meeting in front of a Japanese embassy in Seoul, and also here US there are sporadic meetings and demonstration this. But in fact, once you start reading the book, then you will know what that means, how these voices of individuals come out. Yeah, it's so this one, Eric, this one. Mhm.
Okay. Erica's asking, has the Japanese government apologized for the crime? It sounds like possibly not. If not, how can we ensure that the Japanese government takes responsibility?
This, of course, is the recurring question, and I believe that the Japanese government has, in a way, apologized for the fact that as many as 400,000 girls and women from a variety of countries were subjected to sexual servitude. What remains a sticking point in Korea, in our understanding, is that the Japanese government seems to have delegated the reconciliation part of the truth and reconciliation process to a non-governmental organization.
Mm.
I It occurred to me that the U.S. basically has the same situation in terms of our history of slavery. Numerous presidents, numerous government people have apologized for and acknowledged the role of slavery in the making of the United States of America. Uh, then the question is, how can we take responsibility? Do we make reparations to all African American people? How do we go about this? So I think with that knowledge, it's helpful to understand the very intractable situation which the Republic of Korea finds itself with the government of Japan.
Can you speak a little bit more about the differences maybe between um, the Japanese culture, or how it plays out in society, this sort of reckoning with the negative history, how that compares to how it plays out in the U.S. and trying to reckon with that negative history? Do you see any differences?
The big difference is what I would like to think of as a history of trauma in modern Korea. So if we start from the annexation of the Chosun Kingdom of Korea in 1910, if we take into account the lives that were lost or compromised during the colonial period, when we take into account the conflict within Korean colonial subjects themselves, the backlash after liberation 1945. Oh, you were a collaborator with the Japanese. Conflict that persists to this day. And then, if you take into account the division of the Korean Peninsula, it was never meant to be permanent. It was instituted to expedite the surrender of and the demilitarization of the Japanese on the Korean Peninsula. But 3 years later, two states have been formed in South and North Korea. And then again, think about the massive loss of life in the Korean War, a war in which the U.S. played a very strong role, especially in the bombing of North Korea. If you read Blaine Harden's books about Escape from Camp 14 and the Great Leader and the Fighter Pilot and King of Spies, you'll see, among other things, that the American bombing campaign in Korea during the Korean War was kind of a test run for the use of napalm during the Vietnam War. So think of all the people on the Korean Peninsula who went from the north to the south, or in some cases also from the south to the north, before and during the Korean War. Think about the loss of lives, and what you have is the rhetorical question of Bruce Cummings, who wrote the foreword to a book of trauma stories that we published through the University of Hawaii Press in 2009. And that question was, can we speak of a traumatized nation? So in Korea, there is simply too much pain, and I found this out firsthand through colleagues, through mentors, through students. There is a lot of pain in family history or in personal history that has to be somehow managed if one is to live uh, a meaningful life. And these topics, we were not surprised that Bonio reported that she had been shunned by many of her Korean friends. But these are wounds that in many cases will never heal. In the U.S., we, in most cases, have the benefit of what we might call narrative distance. I myself, I do hear these stories firsthand, but I retain enough distance that will enable me with Ju-Chan to try to do an objective translation of a work that engages us very deeply. We've translated works that involve torture, works that involve the sexual abuse of children at an institution, and perhaps that is one of the reasons why it's been difficult for us to find publishers for some of these works. They simply, there's a great deal of pain that our Korean counterparts are experiencing.
But however, this book is very liberating and triumph and happy ending. And that's what we were looking at. If it's just a miserable and unhappy ending, probably we won't go that. Most of our books end up end with happy ending. And Hanbel asked a question that there are, Dutch women and Australian women. Yes, yes. I did research and I found that Japanese soldiers, especially Indonesia, their area, that they had hostage of Dutch women, and there's a history and there's newspaper articles, and they prefer that white horse. White horse means that white woman, And so when we were approaching publishers, that's one of the things, that it's not just Asia, it's European women too, all involved. And I also watched the documentary about the French women, how they were treated. And some of them treated really miserably by their own French people because they were serving German soldiers. And we try to voice that this is not just Koreans and Asians, it's the everybody involved. And this leads to Me Too and sexual violence and also healing. In fact, the comfort woman grandmas, they are working with a woman who is the victim of sexual violence in Korea. That's what they do. And so this is all connected. However, publishers, I really want to know the answer why we had such a difficulty, had to go through almost a year and a half, not to mention Korea side that they they don't want to work with the two publisher, but we didn't have to go through 32 publishers. It's a puzzle to me till I die.
Yeah.
Candace, would I have time to chime in on that question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hanbil asked a very good question. What do you think is the reason why not a lot of people know about the existence of comfort women from countries other than Korea? And I can't help but wonder if perhaps the countries of the West, or Australia, the Netherlands, might be more comfortable believing that the human trafficking that we see on such a large scale in East Asia was not something that they would be engaged in, but just something that happens in a different part of the world. So I have to wonder if perhaps there is a desire, perhaps unconscious, to want to assume that that human trafficking doesn't go on in our society, but it did go on elsewhere.
Yeah. Also, maybe the numbers is not as massive as Asian countries like Korea. Maybe that's why it's just a special case. Maybe they treat it that way. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I want to ask this question from Peter. Yes, it seems most comfort women were forced to become sterile and later adopted children. Do you know if any had biological children, and if any support structure exists for the children of comfort women?
The first one?
Biological children support services.
Yes, some of them were able to get married. A lot of them could not have children because they have syphilis, gonorrhea, all kind of disease, and most of them, they didn't marry because of shame. And so yeah, we do read that there are some families mention that. Sometimes I click, news from Korea, comfort women, how many still existing and all that. So I read. I think there are biological children. Some of them were able to have, children. And support structure. Yes, there are organizations working with comfort women. Yeah.
Okay.
And for the children.
Yeah, and Erica has a quick follow-up to that. Is there shame in being identified as a child of a comfort woman?
What?
If we are to judge from the question of shame regarding parentage in particular, I would say yes, for sure. We do know that that biracial children have been discriminated against. Um, I wonder if any of you football fans remember that about 10 or 15 years ago, a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers Super Bowl team uh, was the son of a African American father and a Korean woman. And after the Pittsburgh Steelers won the Super Bowl, this player and his mother went back to Korea, and they were treated
Hero.
as heroes. But the mother made sure that people knew that that when she was the new mother of a biracial child before she immigrated, other people would spit at her and call her names.
Mhm.
So yeah, definitely a strong sense of shame in a nation that prides itself on being very homogeneous in terms of bloodline.
Right. Okay, so there's just one more here from Peter, and I um, I think his question is about helping the book get published, but the book is in fact already published and can be purchased tonight through this Buy the Book button on the Crowdcast page. But did you want to speak any more to that? I don't know if you can see the question. You mentioned the desire to get the book published before the deadline. You did talk about that a bit. Um, did you have any maybe public support for the publishing of the book? Is maybe a question we can pull out of there.
I'm not so sure about the publishing of the book, but in recent years, several individuals have created weblogs in which they review translations of Korean fiction, mostly novels. And we have found that this is a very good way to kind of get the news out, particularly in the case of translations published by small publishers that simply do not have the kind of excellent marketing publicity apparatus the University of Washington Press has.
Hmm.
So this is a very valuable way in which the general public can get involved. And of course, there are also online commentary sites such as Goodreads where you can make your opinion known.
Okay. Peter, I think I answered that the deadline is self-imposed. We imposed ourselves the deadline because the old comfort women, the grandmas, they were all 90s, and they are passing every time we click, and one more grandma's gone. So when we had the trouble with the Korean side, meaning author, agent, and the publisher, they refused to sign for two publishers. They refused, and so we had to keep digging, and then we have to give up because we were so sick and tired of. And then we regained energy, and we went further to send out proposals. And so the book is out, and some of grandmas are still able to see the book.
Great.
If the Koreans have more publicity about this book. Right now, it's more U.S. side, the English-speaking world. They are reading more Japanese newspaper articles, but Koreans has not published this article about this book. And so, if you can, if you like the book, and please support us and the University of Washington Press, and make comments and send the reviews, and also introduce the book to your friends, and somebody might be interested. I think that will be really big help.
And if you, as we do, find that the book is definitely not an exercise in Japan bashing, it would be helpful to spread that message as well.
Okay, so after the war, okay, just about so the book says about 200,000 girls were taken or served as a sex slave, and they returned. What returned is about 10%. It's a little less than 25,000 girls came back. I mean, some of them North Koreans. Remember that. And so when 1991, there was Kim Soom, the harmony, the grandma, came public, and that time people start registering as a comfort woman. So there was 238 women registered as a comfort woman, and 2018, as of 2018, it was 240 registered comfort women. However, there are non-registered women still living, and as of this year, this time, it's 16 ladies still surviving. 16 registered comfort women still surviving.
Well, I'm so happy that they were able to see the publication of this book. I want to thank both of you so much for presenting with us. Thank you so much for persevering and getting the book finally published. It seems like a very important work, a very important story that needs to be told, and is sort of able to speak to a lot of the really horrible things that have happened to women throughout the world, really. So those stories need to be told, and we need to hear them. So thank you so much for doing your work. And I want to thank everybody for watching tonight. Thank you so much for hanging on with us through the tech difficulties, and thank you so much for such a lively Q&A. If you want to follow more Town Hall content, you can follow this Crowdcast channel by clicking the follow button in the top right corner. Our calendar is chock full of events coming up this fall, so feel free to visit our website at townhallseattle.org to check that out. If you do want to buy a copy of the book, please use the Buy the Book button on this page. That's going to take you right over to Elliott Bay, so you can support them also with the purchase of the book. So thank you again for watching. Thank you, Bruce and Ju-Chan, for presenting with us, and I hope everybody has a really great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erika. And you had a very good questions. Thank you.
Thanks.